Hello and welcome to my capstone presentation. Thank you for watching this video of my presentation of my capstone project. For this project, I have designed a mitten dryer in response to specific needs as well as use cases that I have witnessed time and time again. And in this video, I have the privilege of taking you through my journey of how I got to the product solution, which I will indeed reveal to you at the culmination of this presentation. So the premise for my undertaking is founded on the reality that damp mittens make for a miserable day. But if you can keep your gloves dry, it's pretty easy to keep your spirits high. So before we dive in, here's a bit of a roadmap of how I'll be covering the journey that has been my capstone project. First, I'll give you a more explicit explanation of the problem that I am tackling in this project, as well as who I'm designing for and the current solutions that they have for this problem. And then I'm going to look at the gap that those current solutions leave for me to take advantage of and the design guidelines I set. Then based on that, and then I'll walk through the solution production that I went through to get to where I am now. Alright, let's get underway. I would like you to imagine with me that you're a ski enthusiast, an intermediate skier, and you've just woken up on the slopeside lodge that you're staying in for a long weekend in April. After a solid breakfast, you get all geared up and hit the slopes. You're having an incredibly enjoyable morning, taking in the views of the snow-covered mountaintops, and getting quite a good exercise in doing so. But then you realize that perhaps the most critical part of your gear is getting a bit damp, and that would be your mittens. After all, it is April, and at the altitude you're at, the snow is still in perfect condition despite it being nearly 40 degrees outside. So with this temperature, the intense skiing you're doing, and the heavily insulated gear you're wearing, you've worked up quite a sweat. As the sun goes behind the peaks and the temperature starts to drop, your now damp mittens begin to conduct the cold, losing their insulative properties that they had when they were dry. By the time you decide to call it a day, your fingers are a bit numb. But back at the lodge, you take off your mittens and all of the rest of your gear and begin to warm up. However, when you go to dry out your mittens, you can't just dry them on the floor air vents like you would if you were at home, because most lodges actually use radiant heating or some other type of building heating and not forced air heating, so there are no vents to be found. And you don't want to throw your mittens in the clothes dryer because the heat from that will damage the specialized materials they use. So you're pretty much left with one option. That's to prop your mitts up on the table in the foyer and let them air dry. And of course, since they're ski mittens, all their insulation means that they air drying, they won't be fully dry until tomorrow night, so you won't be able to use them for skiing tomorrow. This means that you have to go grab that basic thin pair of gloves that you just brought for traveling here. And that is going to be a bit of a bummer, but at least it's better than damp mittens. So what I have just described to you is a very common occurrence for both skiers and snowboarders alike. In my real-world experience, high-performance mittens and gloves such as these can take anywhere from 15 all the way up to 30 hours to air dry. And while they are the best example, skiers and snowboarders are not the only ones who deal with this annoyance. Anyone enjoying the outdoors in the winter who doesn't have an air vent to put their mittens on or at the end of the day has to find a workaround for this dilemma, and it usually means buying and bringing 2 pairs of whatever mittens or gloves that they wear and rotating between those day after day. Or if you don't care about the wear and tear, you may attempt to flip your mittens inside out and just toss them in the dryer, suffering the consequences of the accelerated wear caused by that. So this conundrum leads to my problem statement, and that is that high-performance handwear does not air dry from hand sweat or snow melting in them overnight. This results in their inability to be used multiple days in a row if they have been sweating or gotten damp on the inside for any reason. With this problem clear in our minds, let's look at some personas that I use to bring some real-world details to the outlining of this problem. First, meet Elena. She skis for fun, and she skis when she can find the time and when she can afford. She currently sports these pair of Marmot ski mittens. To combat the issue of her mittens getting damp, Elena has had to buy a second pair of these mittens and alternate between the two from one day to the next. Our second persona is Reggie. Reggie is an avid snowboarder with a fairly flexible and higher-paying job, which means he's able to get out on the slopes and board all season long. He hits the slopes in these snazzy Gordinis you can see here, and this particular pair that he's found actually can flip inside out fairly easy without too much of a struggle, and so he has decided to resign himself to putting the wear and tear on these mitts by drying them in the dryer, and is just going to have to replace them in about a year. Third is Jason here. He is a snowmobiler who will usually take a couple extended trips with his friends to go tear up the fresh snow. He uses this pair of Arctic Cat gloves for all of his snowmobiling, and he has also resorted to buying and bringing a second pair after his friends and his failed experiment drying their gloves on an exhaust pipe. So these personas altogether have given me an organized reference of my end user's needs for this product, while still presenting their needs in a relatable and human way. So with their situations in mind, let's look at the current set of solutions available to them. That would be these products here. This type of product is the extent of what I could find to remedy this issue. They are fairly large products with heavy bases, and likely the main reason for this size and weight is because they're not specialized just to handwear. So they're about as portable as the floor vents in your home. And another drawback is their expense. None of these products are cheap whatsoever. And, as well, let's be honest, they're a bit ugly. And so, they do in fact present me with quite the gap to take advantage of. There's nothing currently on the market that is highly portable, realistically affordable, visually beautiful both in aesthetics and proportion, and because of all of these things, there's nothing that truly fits the kind of lifestyle that its users need. Taking advantage of this market gap leads me to my design guidelines. And so, in order to not only take advantage of this gap, but also truly meet the needs of the target users, I have set the following requirements for myself to make sure that those things happen in the development of my product solution. So the requirements that I have listed out here are to be able to, or that my solution must be able to effectively and totally dry out the insides of high performance mittens and gloves. My solution must also dry these mittens and gloves in under 6 hours, or in other words, overnight. It must also fit the vast majority of both gloves and mittens, not just one or the other. It must not damage the specialized materials used in high performance handwear, and it must function in any location, whether that's a ski lodge, an ice house, a snowmobile trail, or at the camp out site. And it must be packable enough to be easily taken to any one of these locations or in any of these situations. So keep these in mind as we move through the rest of my design process. These are sort of your way of keeping me accountable to accomplish what I set out to. So with these design guidelines, I then went into sketch ideation. I let the guidelines propel my ideation through my sketching and the rest of my design process. And I started ideating on a small device that you'd be able to insert into your mitten or glove, as can be seen here. All of these products would come in a set when purchased, so they would be independent of each other physically, but would be used on a single pair of mittens or gloves. And through this, it was just the very beginning of my exploration of form factor, size, as well as how the device would function. And so from this brainstorming and ideation, I developed 3 different methods of how to deliver airflow into the mitten or glove, and then I set about testing which one of these 3 would be most effective. In order to test these 3 different methods, I modeled and then 3D printed these 3 prototypes. The first method of airflow is accomplished by my first prototype here, and that would be just a single direction device where it simply blows air into the glove or mitten. However, thinking about the insulation of these mittens and gloves, I realized that it would not allow the moist air inside to escape very easily, and so I set about developing a prototype that would then remove that moisture-laden air itself. And accomplishing that is my second prototype here, which has one vent blowing air in, taking dry air from the ambient environment, blowing it into the mitten or glove, and then the other vent takes that air that has circulated through the glove, is now damp, and expels it out. Yet I further theorized that having both the intake and outtake vents at the bottom would not supply airflow effectively to the extremities. And so I made this third prototype, which has the inbound vent offset up to right about where the fingers would start on a glove. Thus that enables it to work not only on mittens but also on gloves. And then the outtake vent on this prototype remains down at the base to allow for more effective circulation and not only reach the extremities but also create the most thorough convection current throughout the entire mitten or glove as compared to the other prototypes. An added bonus, however, of this offset vent design was it solved for the problem of the flop. And these first 2 prototypes is where that flop was an issue, as they didn't extend up into the mitten or glove. The mitten or glove would often flap over, and this would reduce airflow, impeding the dry times. And so by having this offset vent, not only did it do the other things mentioned, but it also gave some structure for the mitten or glove. So it was able to remain upright, as you can see on the bottom row here, and that also helped in the drying. So some fans purchased, fitted to my prototypes, and wired to some batteries, I began the tests, which I conducted on a pair of insulated work gloves, a pair of ski gloves, and then a pair of ski mittens, as seen here. And now for my results. The darkest blue here is the time it took each to air dry. And then the single direction blower, even just with that prototype, was able to cut down the dry times to about half of the air dry times. The real surprise, however, came with the results of the dual direction prototypes, especially that offset vent one. That prototype was able to accomplish a 2 to 3 hour dry time for these mittens and gloves. And that's only with, the cheap fans I bought off Amazon. So in my final product, with the fans spec'd to the right power output, I could get these dry times down to a single hour. And that to me was a game changer. It was a big surprise, made me very happy, but it was a game changer in the fact that now I could have people drying their gloves over lunch, not just overnight. And so with that ability, I realized that now my product could be used by a much greater audience than I initially intended. It's not only useful to those who are enjoying the outdoors for fun, doing recreational things, but also those who work outside during the winter, because they could dry their mittens or gloves that they use over their lunch break. And so to reflect this discovery, I added a few more personas. First of which is Valerie. Valerie is an ecologist, and now with these 1-hour dry times, even she can make use of my product. Being an ecologist, of course, she's working outside all year round and in the toughest conditions through the winter. She uses these Helly Hansen gloves here for her winter work, and currently has to bring a second pair out to the field with her, as her work is often physical, and her gloves will be damp by midday. She'll have to switch out to her second pair for the afternoon. We also have people like BJ. He is a heavy equipment operator, and he works in these Hestra 3-fingered mitts. When he has to do extensive machine maintenance, he'll often sweat through these mitts here, and he doesn't currently have a workaround for this problem. So now with the results of my testing as mentioned, as well as this expanded target user base, I then got back to sketching. And this time I took that functionality that worked best from the prototypes, those offset vents, and mainly sketched to ideate how to style it. This I once again began with a pair of devices, so a single one for each glove or mitten. However, I then pivoted to designing a single housing that held all of the fans, as well as a single battery pack and a single circuit board for the sake of manufacturing, expense, as well as ease of use for the user. And so this would be a single device with a double set of vents that would come up from the top of it for a pair of mittens or gloves to set on. And after going through a number of iterations of this concept with the base and the exchangeable or interchangeable nozzles with the offset vents, I finally came to this design that you'll see in the lower right. It is a compact design sporting a compelling use of simple geometry. And with this design in hand, I then started CADing my product. In CAD, I continued to evolve my design and make alterations as needed, particularly, or mainly, I should say, for manufacturing reasons. And I won't bore you with all the technical specs, but I just wanted to show you these views of the inner workings of my model to say that everything from fan type, battery placement, overall dimensions, to draft angles and how to fasten everything together was indeed considered. Now with my CAD model built, I was finally able to demonstrate what my product could look like in reality. So here are some of my renders. And you can see the vents on top, the nozzles with the offset vents, are able to come out of the slot of the main housing to be replaced by ones with the same base size but a highly tapered top that is able to then also fit kid-sized gloves and mittens. And to take this a step further, I also rendered my product with the branding of a few different companies who also make other kinds of winter gear. So here you can see my product if it were to be licensed, manufactured, and sold by Gyro, along with all of their other winter gear. And then I also put Oakley branding on it to demonstrate it if they were to sell this product along with their winter gear. So now circling back to those design guidelines I set for my project, I was in fact able to accomplish every single one of my design guidelines. I am able to achieve not just an under 6-hour dry time, but an under 3-hour dry time in testing, and again, spec'd with proper fans, a final production model would be able to achieve a single-hour dry time. As described earlier, I designed these nozzles to fit both mittens as well as gloves with the offset air delivery, and again, as mentioned, can be switched out for ones that taper significantly in order to fit kid-sized mittens and gloves. My device does not damage the specialty materials used on high-performance mittens and gloves, as it uses purely air circulation to accomplish the drying and no heat. It's a rugged and durable design and construction, and it's a very small, manageable package that can easily slip into a slim backpack that can be taken out on the slopes or the trails or wherever it might need to go. And it's long-lasting, rechargeable by USB-C battery, aids its extreme portability, or adds to it, I should say. And thus, my mitten dryer fulfills every one of my design guidelines, fills a massive market gap for glove and mitten drying, and delivers to the user a product that they actually need because it addresses and solves their needs directly and effectively. And so by keeping their gloves dry, I plan to keep their spirits high. Thank you so much for listening.